Welcome to week 3. We have lots of information coming at you this week. This is all about writing tips and tricks. So much information to share, things that hopefully, my goal is to share some information with you this week that's going to make something in your head click and you will go, oh, I can do this. I actually can do this. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to dive in. I need to share the PowerPoint for just a moment so I can get us set up. I'm not sure what's going on with my mouse. Is moving very slowly. I'm wondering if that means that the batteries in the mouse are going down. But it appears it's not just the mouse, right? It's everything. All right. It's going to be fine. So again, like I said, we are going to be talking about writing tips and tricks today. But we're going to begin with the Stephen King short story, The Man Who Loved Flowers. And I don't have the book with me, and it's in my office, so I have it ready to go. We'll open this back up and put us right into the story. So we're going to read The Man Who Loved Flowers by Stephen King. And I have a reason for this. There is a purpose. So if you will just sit back and enjoy, we're going to read the story and then we're going to talk about it. There's a lot that we can take away from, well, I don't want to say too much. So I'm just going to dive in. This is The Man Who Loved Flowers by Stephen King. On an early evening in May of 1963, a young man with his hand in his pocket walked briskly up New York's Third Avenue. The air was soft and beautiful. The sky was darkening by slow degrees from blue to the calm and lovely violet of dusk. There are people who love the city, and this was one of the nights that made them love it. Everyone standing in the doorways of the delicatessens and dry cleaning shops and restaurants seemed to be smiling. An old lady pushing 2 bags of grocery in an old baby pram grinned at the young man and hailed him. "Hey, beautiful." The young man gave her a half smile and raised his hand in a wave. She passed on her way thinking, he's in love. He had that look about him. He was dressed in a light gray suit, the narrow tie pulled down a little, his top collar button undone. His hair was dark and cut short. His complexion was fair, his eyes a light blue. Not an extraordinary face, but on this soft spring evening, on this avenue, in May of 1963, he was beautiful, and the old woman found himself thinking with a moment's sweet nostalgia that in spring anyone can be beautiful, if they're hurrying to meet the one of their dreams for dinner and maybe dancing after. Spring is the only season when nostalgia never seems to turn bitter, and she went on her way glad that she had spoken to him, and glad he had returned the compliment by raising his hand in half salute. The young man crossed 63rd Street, walking with a bounce in his step and that same half smile on his lips. Partway up the block, an old man stood beside a chip green hand cart filled with flowers. The predominant color was yellow, and a yellow fever of jonquils and late crocuses. The old man also had carnations and a few hothouse tea roses, mostly yellow and white. He was eating a pretzel and listening to a bulky transistor radio that was sitting kitty-corner on his handcart. The radio poured out bad news that no one listened to. A hammer murderer was still on the loose. JFK had declared that the situation in a little Asian country called Vietnam would bear watching. An unidentified woman had been pulled from the East River. A grand jury had failed to indict a crime overlord in the current city administration's war on heroin. The Russians had exploded a nuclear device. None of it seemed real. None of it seemed to matter. The air was soft and sweet. 2 men with beer bellies stood outside a bakery, pitching nickels and ribbing each other. Spring trembled on the edge of summer, and in the city, summer is the season of dreams. The young man passed the flower stand, and the sound of the bad news faded. He hesitated, looked over his shoulder, and thought it over. He reached into his coat pocket and touched that something in there again. For a moment his face seemed puzzled, lonely, almost haunted. And then, as his hand left the pocket, it regained its former expression of eager expectation. He turned back to the flower stand, smiling. He would bring her some flowers. That would please her. He loved to see her eyes light up with surprise and joy when he brought her a surprise. Little things because he was far from rich. A box of candy, a bracelet, once only a bag of Valencia oranges because he knew they were Norma's favorite. My young friend, the flower vendor said as the man in the gray suit came back, running his eyes over the stock in the hand cart. The vendor was maybe 68, wearing a torn gray knitted sweater and a soft cap in spite of the warmth of the evening. His face was a map of wrinkles, his eyes were deep in pouches, and a cigarette jittered between his fingers. But he also remembered how it was to be young in the spring, young and so much in love that you practically zoomed everywhere. The vendor's face was normally sour, but now he smiled a little, just as the old woman pushing the groceries had, because this guy was such an obvious case. He brushed pretzel crumbs from the front of his baggy sweater and thought, if this kid were sick, they'd have him in intensive care right now. How much are your flowers? The young man asked. I'll make you up a nice bouquet for $1. They're tea roses. They're hothouse. Cost a little more, 70 cents apiece. I'll sell you half dozen for $3.50. Expensive, the young man said. Nothing good comes cheap, my young friend. Didn't your mother ever teach you that? The young man grinned. She might have mentioned it at that. Sure she did. I give you half dozen, 2 red, 2 yellow, 2 white. Can't do no better than that, can I? Put in some baby's breath. They love that. And fill it out with some nice fern. Nice. Or you could have the bouquet for $1. They? The young man asked, still smiling. My young friend, the flower vendor said, flicking his cigarette butt into the gutter and returning the smile. No one buys flowers for themselves in May. It's like a national law. You understand what I mean? The young man thought of Norma, her happy, surprised eyes and her gentle smile, and he ducked his head a little. I guess I do at that. Sure you do. What do you say? Well, what do you think? I'm going to tell you what I think. Hey, advice is still free, isn't it? The young man smiled and said, I guess it's the only thing that left that is. You damn tootin' it is, the flower vendor said. Okay, my young friend. If the flowers are for your mother, you get her the bouquet. A few jonquils, a few crocuses, some lily of the valley. She don't spoil it by saying, Oh, Junior, I love them. How much did they cost? Oh, that's too much. Don't you know enough not to throw your money around? The young man threw his head back and laughed. The vendor said, But if it's your girl, that's a different thing, my son, and you know it. You bring her the tea roses and she don't turn into an accountant. You take my meaning? Hey, she's going to throw her arms around your neck. I'll take the tea roses, the young man said, and this time it was the flower vendor's turn to laugh. The 2 men pitching nickels glanced over, smiling. Hey, kid, one of them called. You want to buy a wedding ring cheap? I'll sell you mine. I don't want it no more. The young man grinned and blushed to the roots of his dark hair. The flower vendor picked out 6 tea roses, snipped the stems a little, spritzed them with water, and wrapped them in a large conical spill. Tonight's weather looks just the way you'd want it, the radio said. Fair and mild, temps in the mid to upper 60s. Perfect for a little rooftop stargazing, if you're the romantic type. Enjoy, Greater New York. Enjoy. The flower vendor scotch taped the seam of the paper spill and advised the young man to tell his lady that a little sugar added to the water that she put them in would preserve them longer. I'll tell her, the young man said. He held out a $5 bill. Thank you. Just doing the job, my young friend, the vendor said, giving him $1.02. His smile grew a bit. Give her a kiss for me. On the radio, the Four Seasons began singing Sherry. The young man pocketed his change and went on up the street, eyes wide and alert and eager, looking not so much around him at the life ebbing and flowing up and down Third Avenue as inward and ahead, anticipating. But certain things did impinge. A mother pulling a baby in a wagon, the baby's face comically smeared with ice cream. A little girl jumping rope and sing-songing out her rhyme. Betty and Henry up in a tree, Kissing. First comes love, then comes marriage. Here comes Henry with the baby carriage. 2 women stood outside a washateria, smoking and comparing pregnancies. A group of men were looking in a hardware store window at a gigantic color TV with a four-figure price tag. A baseball game was on, and all the players' faces looked green. The playing field was a vague strawberry color, and the New York Mets were leading the Phillies by a score of 6-1 in the top of the ninth. He walked on, carrying the flowers, unaware that the two women outside the washateria had stopped talking for a moment and had watched him wistfully as he walked by with his paper of tea roses. Their days of receiving flowers were long over. He was unaware of a young traffic cop who stopped the cars at the intersection of 3rd and 69th with a blast of his whistle to let him cross. The cop was engaged himself and recognized the dreamy expression on the young man's face from his own shaving mirror, where he had often seen it lately. He was unaware of the two teenage girls who passed him going the other way and then clutched themselves and giggled. At 73rd Street, he stopped and turned right. This street was a little darker, lined with brownstones and walk-down restaurants with Italian names. 3 blocks down, a stickball game was going on in the fading light. The young man did not go that far. Half a block down, he turned into a narrow lane. Now the stars were out, gleaming softly, and the lane was dark and shadowy, lined with vague shapes of garbage cans. The young man was alone now. No, not quite. A wavering yowl rose in the purple gloom, and the young man frowned. It was some tomcat's love song, and there was nothing pretty about that. He walked more slowly and glanced at his watch. It was 8:15, and Norma should be just. Then he saw her, coming toward him from the courtyard, wearing dark blue slacks and a sailor blouse that made his heart ache. It was always a surprise seeing her for the first time. It was always a sweet shock. She looked so young. Now his smile shone out, radiated out, and he walked faster. "Norma," he said. She looked up and smiled, but as they drew together, the smile faded. His own smile trembled a little, and he felt a moment's disquiet. Her face over the sailor blouse suddenly seemed blurred. It was getting darker now. Could he have been mistaken? Surely not. It was Norma. "I brought you flowers," he said in a happy relief, and handed the paper spill to her. She looked at them for a moment and smiled and handed them back. "Thank you. But you're mistaken," she said. "My name is—" "Norma," he whispered, and pulled the short-handled hammer out of his coat pocket where it had been all along. "They're for you, Norma. It was always for you. All for you." She backed away, her face a round white blur, her mouth an opening black O of terror, and she wasn't Norma. Norma was dead. She had been dead for 10 years, and it didn't matter because she was going to scream. And he swung the hammer to stop the scream, to kill the scream, and he swung the hammer. The spill of flowers fell out of his hand. The spill spilled and broke open, spilling red, white, and yellow tea roses beside the tin and trash cans where the cats made alien love in the dark, screaming in love, screaming, screaming. He swung the hammer and she didn't scream, but she might scream because she wasn't Norma. None of them were Norma. And he swung the hammer, swung the hammer, swung the hammer. She wasn't Norma, and so he swung the hammer, as he had done 5 other times. Some unknown time later, he slipped the hammer back into his inner coat pocket and backed away from the dark shadow sprawled on the cobblestones, away from the litter of tea roses by the garbage cans. He turned and left the narrow lane. It was full dark now. The stickball players had gone in. If there were bloodstains on his suit, they wouldn't show. Not in the dark. Not in the soft, late spring dark. And her name had not been Norma, but he knew what his name was. It was Love. His name was Love, and he walked these dark streets because Norma was waiting for him, and he would find her someday soon. He began to smile, and a bounce came into his step as he walked on down 73rd Street. A middle-aged married couple sitting on the steps of the building watched him go by, head cocked, eyes afar away, a half-smile on his lips. When he had passed by, the woman said, "How come you never look that way anymore?" "Huh? Nothing," she said. But she watched the young man in the gray suit disappear into the gloom of the encroaching night, and thought that if there was anything more beautiful than springtime, it was young love. That, my friends, is The Man Who Loved Flowers by Stephen King. Now, some of you might have been like, wow, that was a Stephen King. Yes, that was a Stephen King. This is from the collection Night Shift that I shared with you last week or the week before. had previously been the book that we used for Comp 1. This is my favorite story from the book. I have been reading this to English classes for 14 years now, going on 15. And the reason for that is because there's much that we can discuss here. The very first thing that I want to discuss with you is I just want you to look at it. Just look at it. Let's go ahead and make this a little smaller. Let's just look at it. There's the first page. When you open up a first page that looks like this, lots of words, lots of big paragraphs, how many of you are like, "Ooh, boy, let me read that. That looks like fun"? Or do you look at it and go, "Ugh, that's going to take forever"? Well, I know what the answer is because I've been asking classes that for years. When I very first started doing this, this was at Vatterott College, which is a trade school, was a trade school. And so this would have been back in 2010, 2011, when I first started reading this story to classes. And I remember it was paper copy, right? And so I have a room full of men. These are all HVAC, welding, plumbing, electrical students, right? They're all there. They don't think they need an English class. So I had to do something to make it entertaining and interesting. So I chose Stephen King. And so it was so great because I passed it out and there were groans in the room. Groans because it looked like it was going to take forever. It looked long. And let's talk about why does it look long? Well, quite simply because the paragraphs all look to be close to the same size and they're all lengthy. Well, no one wants to dive into that. Very rarely does someone want to dive into that. Very rarely does someone look at a piece of writing that has chunky paragraphs and go, "Ooh, let me read that." Now, let me prove my point. So that's the first page. That's the second page. Of the two of those, which looks easier to read? Well, the second one, obviously, because the paragraph lengths are broken up. And that, my friends, is something we want to keep in mind. We talked last week about making things visually pleasing. Normally, this would be in that lecture, but I moved it here because I've got some other things that I want to talk about. So, making your writing visually pleasing has to do with what your paper actually looks like. Does your paper look easy to read, or does your paper look hard to read? Now, again, here I'm going to draw that distinction between your academic writing and your real world writing. When you're in a class where the professor is very much a stickler on your paragraphs must be 10 sentences long, right? Or they all need to be the same. They all need to have a topic sentence, a closing sentence. They need to have 3 points inside. Whatever it is that your professor expects and desires from you, that's what you want to do. Outside of those constraints, in pretty much any writing that you're going to do anywhere else in your life, you need to remember this idea. Your writing has to be visually pleasing in order for it to even be read. If you go at somebody in the real world or in a professor's room that wants variety and you give big, giant chunk paragraphs the whole time, it's not going to get read. It's not. Remember, there's a big difference between this and this. Big difference. So I'm not saying have all of your paragraphs be one sentence, by no means, but we want to have a paragraph with 5 sentences next to a paragraph with 10 sentences, next to a paragraph with 2 sentences, next to a paragraph with 4 sentences, next to a paragraph with 6 sentences. Break it up. Make them look different. When they look different and there's white space on the paper, even a little bit of indentation or this blank space that happens on the right side of the page when a sentence ends before the next paragraph begins, any amount of white space is going to make your writing look easier to navigate to a reader. Let's translate this to when I'm grading your papers. When I'm grading your papers and you turn in big chunk paragraphs, I'm talking an entire page is one paragraph. I don't want to read that. I'll be honest with you. I don't want to read that. Why would you give me that? Why do you think that I want to have to navigate that and keep my place and use my finger to not lose my place? Break it up. Make it look easy to read. Make it easier to read. Break it up. Make the paragraphs readable chunks. All right. Very important. That's a very important first takeaway from this short story. Another one, and I'm going to get ahead of myself in the PowerPoint just a little bit because I want to do this while this is open. We're going to make this bigger where you can see it. In the coming pages of the PowerPoint, I'm going to talk to you about repetition. Now, repetition is a trick or it's a strategy when it comes to writing. It is a literary device, repetition. And we see repetition used here in Stephen King's short story. Now, the instance I'm sure that is sticking out in all of your minds is on that last page. So let's take a look at this here. And as I'm reading through this again, count how many times the word screaming is used, or scream. Any variant of the word scream, count how many times it's used. She backed away, her face a round white blur, her mouth an opening black O of terror. And she wasn't Norma. Norma was dead. She had been dead for 10 years. And it didn't matter because she was going to scream. And he swung the hammer to stop the scream, to kill the scream. And he swung the hammer, the spill of flowers fell out of his hand. The spill spilled and broke open, spilling red, white, and yellow tea roses beside the dented trash cans where the cats made alien love in the dark, screaming in love, screaming, screaming. He swung the hammer and she didn't scream, but she might scream because she wasn't Norma. None of them were Norma. And he swung the hammer, swung the hammer, swung the hammer. She wasn't Norma, so he swung the hammer, as he had done 5 other times. How many times did you count scream? 8. 8 times scream is used in this 2-paragraph chunk. 8 times. Did it pull you out of the story, or did it push you deeper into the story where you didn't want to be? See, it's a literary device. And when used well, it makes the reader uncomfortable in the way you want them to be uncomfortable. Stephen King is a genius when it comes to crafting a scene, such as this, like scream, 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 scream. And you, the listener, you're going, oh my God, stop, make it stop. Right? Did you feel that way? I'm sure you did. Now, let's count how many times he swung the hammer. We don't have to read it again to do that, but he swung the hammer, 1, and he swung the hammer, the spill of flowers fell. And then he swung the hammer. She didn't scream, but she might scream. Swung the hammer, swung the hammer, swung the hammer. And so he swung the hammer 7 times. I didn't use my thumb on this hand. 7 times he swung the hammer. Again, this is intentional by Stephen King. This repetition is intentional. That is to catch your attention, to pull you in. So we have scream 8 times, swung the hammer 7 times. Now, my favorite bit is the spill, spilled, spilling. Genius, right there. Drop the mic, walk away. King, Stephen King, you're the king. Like literally. The spill spilled and broke open, spilling red, white, and yellow tea roses. Oh, you guys, that moment. Wow. In 2 paragraphs, we have so much repetition, and its entire intent is to make you go, stop. Did it work? It worked for me. And it's worked for just about every class I've read this out loud to. I'll never forget, though, it was so much fun to read this to large groups of men because they would get so uncomfortable at the end. They'd be like, why'd you read us that? I have my reasons because you're not going to forget this lesson about repetition. That's one of the reasons. Let's also take a look here. This sentence, this entire paragraph is 1 sentence. Did you notice that as I was reading it? King gives almost no space to take a break, to draw a breath. And then again, this is a literary device. This is an intentional run-on sentence. This is meant to make you feel anxiety. Anxiety. Make it stop. Make it stop. I need to breathe. Genius. Absolutely genius. It's hard to read out loud. I challenge you. Try it. For real. Try reading that sentence, that whole paragraph, that one sentence. Try reading that out loud. You tell me where you put the breaths. I've read this many times, and every time I get to that right where the cats made alien love in the dark, and I'm like, I can't breathe. I'm gonna have an attack. But I think it's amazing because the whole point is to make you feel uncomfortable, to give you anxiety, and it works. Now, let's get back to the repetition bit, and we're going to go back to the beginning on that first page. There is an example of repetition on this page that makes my skin crawl. And I have the nerve, the audacity to want to correct Stephen King. Absolutely do. Let's look at the paragraph that starts out. He turned back to the flower stand smiling. So here we go. He turned back to the flower stand smiling. He would bring her some flowers. That would please her. He loved to see her eyes light up with surprise and joy when he brought her a surprise. Little things because he was far from rich. He loved to see her eyes light up with surprise and joy when he brought her a surprise. Really, Stephen? There does not need to be two instances of surprise in this sentence. It does not help the sentence. In fact, for an English teacher specifically, it makes me go, ugh. Let's take one of those out. Repetition is not always used in service of the story or the idea. In this instance, it doesn't serve it. And the one of those, one could be removed and the sentence work better. What if it read, he loved to see her eyes light up with joy when he brought her a surprise? Fixed. However, it could also just read, he loved to see her eyes light up when he brought her a surprise. Eyes lighting up indicates joy, does it not? That's what eyes lighting up means. It means that you're happy. So we have to be careful with that description. To say eyes light up with surprise and joy is telling the reader how to feel. That's not necessary. He loved to see her eyes light up when he brought her a surprise. Says it all. So sometimes repetition serves your story or your idea. Sometimes it hurts your story or idea. Another thing I want to point out here before we move on to some of our other information is there's so much here. I love this story. Let's do this one first. This paragraph right here, the radio poured out bad news. How many of you, when I read this paragraph, went, oh, foreshadowing? Not everybody does when this is read. Some students, the occasional student will be like, oh, I knew something bad was coming because of what I heard. But then other students will get to the end and be like, what the hell? Or heck, right? Sorry. So here we've got the radio poured out bad news that no one listened to. Isn't that interesting, that wording right there? The radio poured out bad news that no one listened to. Stephen King is telling you, don't listen to what I'm about to tell you. And then he says, the very first thing, a hammer murderer was still on the loose. Well, there it is right there, right? There's our foreshadowing. But we might forget about it with the following information. JFK had declared that the situation in a little Asian country called Vietnam would bear watching. An unidentified woman had been pulled from the East River. A grand jury had failed to indict a crime overlord in the current city administration's war on heroin. The Russians had exploded a nuclear device. Now, let's take a look at that little bit right there. Something that's really interesting that you want to keep in mind is you're not the audience that Stephen King wrote this for. So we can all get knocked off our high horse just a little bit here. This wasn't written for us. This wasn't written in the day and age that we live in. This was written before I was born, or right around the time I was born. This story's over 50 years old. This would have been written to an audience in the late 1960s, 69, perhaps 70. I forget if it's 69, 70, or 71. It's written somewhere in that area. So we have to keep that in mind when we are looking for the message inside of a piece of writing. When was it written? What was going on in the world at that time? And so when we pay attention to that, the structure of this paragraph begins to make even more sense. And we understand how Stephen King's mind works even more. So let's take a look at this. JFK had declared a situation in a little Asian country called Vietnam would bear watching. When was this story set? Let's take a look at the top here. On an early evening in May of 1963. So this story was set in 63. However, it was written 69, 70, 71 in that area. I could look that up real quick. Let's look it up real quick so we'll know for certain. When was The Man Who Loved Flowers written? Oh, no, it was first published in 77, but that doesn't say when he wrote it. I know he wrote it and held on to it for a while. So it was first published in 77, but I know it was written before that. I've found it before, but okay. So anyway, we're back to this because that's when Night Shift was published, was in 77. All of the stories in Night Shift were written in the late 60s and early 70s, pieces that he held on to and that he just put in a collection. So anyway, let's get back to this. So when this was written, late 60s, early 70s, Vietnam had already started. The Vietnam War was happening. It was in full swing. So when he's telling an audience at that time that in May of 1963, remember that JFK was still alive and that JFK had said that a situation in a little Asian country called Vietnam would bear watching, the audience that this was actually written to would have immediately forgotten about the Hammer murderer. Because, yeah, that's part of our real lives. That's really part of the world. That's what's going on in our world, Vietnam. See the brilliance there? And then it goes on to talk about some things that regularly happen in the New York City area, right? And the Russians exploding a nuclear device. That was a major issue back in those days, major issue. Like everybody was terrified of that. Nowadays, we kind of go, oh, our video games depict it. We just watched a TV show called The Fallout, right? So it's based off the video game Fallout, and it's all about a post-apocalyptic, the bomb gets dropped all over the world. Everybody's dead except for the few. And by the way, it was a really silly show, but it's fine. But yeah, so this whole nuclear device, we're used to the idea now, but back in those days when this was actually written, the audience it was written to, it was just an absolutely horrifying, terrifying prospect because they remember what had been done at the close of World War II with the atomic bomb. And millions of people died. So the people that this was written to are not going to remember the Hammer murderer still on the loose. Out of all of those things listed there, that's the one thing that's not real. So they're going to forget about it. And not only that, but because right before that, he said, no one listened to. So don't listen to this. Now, after all of the things that he lists that the radio says, it says, none of it seemed real. None of it seemed to matter. So not only is he telling us not to listen to it, at the end of it, he says, none of it seemed real. None of it seemed to matter. We can sandwich an idea with words, with phrases that are going to make your reader go, oh, it's no big deal. We do that already. Some of you, many of you have this skill set. We do this when we have to break bad news to someone. Here's a happy thing. Here's the bad news. Oh, but here's another happy thing. It's sandwiching. It's a literary device. It's not the technical term for it, but I like it. Let's call it sandwiching. Putting that idea in between information that's going to blur it. Stephen King did that here. Absolutely brilliant. Another thing that we can take a look at in this story, I just want to point out to you that this story is not written with big words, right? This story is written with everyday, normal language, and yet it has the capacity to pull every single one of us into it to the point where when the hammer is swinging, we all want to say, stop! But it's all regular, everyday words. I don't know that there are hardly any words in here that any of us would be like, oh, I don't know what that is, except maybe the old baby pram. But that is an old-fashioned word for stroller. Okay, we don't call them prams anymore. We call them strollers. And then in the little song, which we used to sing when I was a kid, which is why I know the tune, it does say baby carriage, but again, that's another word for stroller. And back in those days, the color TV wasn't like the color TV you have today. Like you have like HDMI or whatever that's called. I don't know. HD. You guys are all like, that's hilarious. But we have HD TV now. I didn't have that back when I was a kid. Back when I was a kid, color TV was somewhat new and the colors weren't great. So that's what he's saying here is that the playing field or the players' faces look green and the playing field was a vague strawberry color. I love that because for me, that's a memory. I remember that. I remember walking by the TV stores or going in the TV stores and they would have the different TVs on in the TV stores. And I guess you can do that at Best Buy now, but it's just not the same. TVs used to be in big giant boxes, right? They were heavy. Like it was just quite an experience. And the colors were just not vibrant like today. So anyway, moving on. The language here. It's fairly regular everyday language. And I'm getting to my favorite word in the whole piece. In this paragraph, some unknown time later, this is where my favorite word in the entire piece sits. It's a word you use every day. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because so many times when you're writing, you want to find the fancy word. You want to sound intelligent. You want to sound to your professor like you read and studied hard and you know all the new big words. Don't try to sound fancier than you are. Don't try to sound like someone other than who you are. Use words that your audience knows. Use regular everyday language. That's what Stephen King did. And it works. Swung the hammer, all words we use. Scream, that's a word we use. But let's take a look at this paragraph in particular. There is a regular everyday word here in this piece that has deep, heavy, spiritual meaning in the way that King has used it. And it's a word you use every day. Literally, you use every day. So let's take a look here, see if you can find it. Some unknown time later, he slipped the hammer back into his inner coat pocket and backed away from the dark shadow sprawled on the cobblestones, away from the litter of tea roses by the garbage cans. He turned and left the narrow lane. It was full, dark now. The stickball players had gone in. If there were bloodstains on his suit, they wouldn't show, not in the dark, not in the soft, late spring dark. And her name had not been Norma, but he knew what his name was. It was love. My favorite word in this entire piece comes in a 5-word sentence. It was full. Dark now. Full. Every day we say the word full. The gas is full. My stomach is full. We use that word full all the time. We throw it around. But the way Stephen King has used it here, that simple word means everything. It is full, dark now. It is spiritually dark now. Full, dark. Oh, amazing. Absolutely amazing. Love this story. Love this story. Love the things that we can take a look at and pull from it. So, with vocabulary, go with the first word that comes to mind, especially if it's simple words. Use words your audience is going to understand. Don't try to sound smart. Don't try to sound fancy when you are writing. So, those are some tips and tricks that we can take from that short story. Here we are. We're back to the PowerPoint. So, we'll move past that. I get there? Okay. So, thoughts. Obviously, we can't share our thoughts because you're an online class, but we can move on. So here's where I will talk to my in-person class about what that looks like and what this looks like. Right? Big difference in readability. Big difference. So making it visually pleasing does not stop at formatting. So we've already talked about a couple of these things that are about to pop up on the screen, but I'll kind of skip through those when we get to them because I've already addressed them. But we have to make our writing visually pleasing. We have to watch our word choices. And if you want to be a better communicator, keep all of these things in mind. It can be the simplest word. It can be just a bit of white space. Talk to your audience, not around them, and know your audience. You have to know something about your audience, and we'll talk more about that throughout the semester. Cut out what's not necessary. Stephen King calls that killing your darlings. If there's something like a second surprise that doesn't help your sentence, cut it out. He loved to see her eyes light up when he brought her a surprise, is all that's needed in that sentence. We know what eyes lighting up means. You don't have to tell me surprise and joy. I know that. Eyes lighting up, it's a happy thing. So cut out what's not necessary. And then watch your grammar, spelling, etc. But let's look at some very specific ideas over here. So there's the repetition. We don't have to address that again. Cliches. In your writing, avoid cliches. Cliches are just not helpful. They are trite sayings like don't beat around the bush that have been said far too many times, and they don't help your writing. They, in fact, make your writing boring. Another thing is euphemisms. You want to be careful with euphemisms. I'm not going to tell you not to use a euphemism, but I'm not going to tell you to use a euphemism. What I'm going to tell you is you need to know your audience. And I'm also going to tell you that it's not fair for me to keep using that word without telling you what it means. It's an unfamiliar term to most of you. So, what is a euphemism? Well, a euphemism is using, how many times can I say the word, right? A euphemism is using a soft word in place of a harsh word. It's using a soft phrase in place of a harsh phrase. So it's making something sound not as bad as it is. That's a euphemism. Okay. And so that would be like saying, well, it's darn hot outside. Darn is a euphemism. I use a lot of euphemisms because I'm just not comfortable with a heck ton of cussing. It's just not me. So I use a lot of euphemisms. There are times, though, when a cuss word is needed, in my opinion. And there are many times where you can just leave them all out. So here's an example. We could say, it's darn hot outside. Or we could say, it's damn hot outside. Or we could say, it's hot outside. Or we could say, y'all, I just fried an egg on the sidewalk. And not even have to use the word hot. Not even have to worry about darn or damn. The choice that you make will be dependent upon who your audience is and the message that you have. Do you use a euphemism or do you use a harsh word? Do you just leave them out altogether? It's best to make what you're trying to say visually or visual, like use descriptive words that actually make it visual so that the person can put themselves there with the senses. So anyway, that's euphemisms. Do I use a soft word in place of a harsh word or not? Slang, know your audience. Is your audience going to be turned off by using slang? Then don't do it. Is your audience only going to hear you if you use their slang? Then use it. It's that simple. Know your audience. What will your audience listen to? What's going to shut down your audience? That's something you have to know and you have to think about. It can't, your writing can never just be, well, it's what I wanted. That's not sharing a message that's going to get read or heard. You have to consider your audience and then use literary devices, use your language and your words in such a way that the audience will be accepting of them. So if your audience is going to be offended by slang and you don't want them to be offended, don't use it. If your audience is going to be offended by slang and you do want them to be offended, use it. Use it in service of the idea, or don't use it because you need the idea to work. That's going to be up to you, but you have to know your audience to be able to do that. Fancy writing, same thing. Don't try to sound fancier than you are. Just don't. It immediately makes the writing not sound authentic. So let's don't do that. And that's why I shared with you. It was full, dark down. Simple word, a word we use every day. And yet in that story, it meant everything. So don't try to sound fancy. Be careful with sexist language. We live in a world where people are easily offended, is what it is. So if you want to be offensive, use it. If you don't want to be offensive, be careful. Be considerate, especially when we're using pronouns. You want to be considerate. Um, know your audience. Again, it comes down to that know your audience. Announcements. In our writing, we do not want to make announcements. And what is an announcement? An announcement is when you say, this essay is going to inform you that. Just jump into what you got to say. This essay is going to inform you that repetition in writing is often effective and sometimes not. So instead of saying, this essay is going to inform you that, just say, repetition in an essay is often effective. Leave off the announcement. The announcement's boring. It's deadwood. It does nothing in the service of your idea, so leave it off. And throughout the semester, there are going to be those of you who are going to continue to use it or to use announcements. And I will tell you, cut the announcement. Cut the announcement. There's that unfamiliar term. So we've already talked about that with the euphemisms. You have to define unfamiliar terms. And with that, here's a little bit of a confidence boost. Every one of you needs to understand you know things that your audience doesn't. You know things I don't know. You know things that the person next to you doesn't know. We all have different areas in which we are informed. And so oftentimes we need to think about our audience and understand there are terms that we probably need to give them a definition for. It would be very unfair of me to just say, be careful with using euphemisms and then move on to slang and not explain that to you. That would be unfair. You'd be thinking, what the heck? What does that even mean? I don't know what that means, right? Well, it means using what the heck instead of what the hell. So define unfamiliar terms for your audience. The imperative and I. With this one, I want to say to you to be very careful how much I you use when you're writing in first person, because I can become overwhelming, especially when you're using it at the beginning of every sentence. I think, I feel, I want, I need, blah, blah, blah. You're going to turn your reader away fast. No one wants to read your self-involved writing. Now, I will say this to you. When you write a rough draft, it is normal to write I. But that's something in the editing process that we have to be aware of that we do so we can go back through our writing and rearrange those sentences or just take it out. Anytime you're saying, I think, that can be taken out completely. Just drop the I think. It doesn't need to be there. Those are deadwood words. So take them out. Just jump into what it is you think. You're writing, it's in first person. You don't need to say I think, right? So be careful with how much you're using the word I in your writing. Use variety. And we've already talked about using variety in our paragraph lengths. I've shown that to you. But you want to also use variety in your sentence length and variety in your word length. Variety psychologically makes a thing look easy to read. Please remember that. Very important point. Word art, we want to be careful with word art. Word art is using that ellipses, that dot, dot, dot in our writing. I use it a lot. I am an ellipses fiend. It's terrible. Ellipses are dashes. You can see in the text there, just to the right of this column, there are 2 dashes because it's a pause. I'm very dramatic when I talk and when I write, and so I have lots of dashes and lots of ellipses, and sometimes I use them interchangeably. Really, Daisha, you just need to calm down, maybe use a comma. Word art can be distracting to your audience. Now, word art can also be putting too much in bold, too much in italics, underlining too much. It can be exclamation points. Oh, I have this one chick that I know, y'all. I can't stand reading her text messages because she will put 15 exclamation points on the end of just about everything, and she never spells out the word you. It's just the letter U. And for the word your, it's only ever you are. I can't handle it. I can't handle it. Drives me batty. So word art is sometimes going to get your message lost because most of the time I don't read what she's written, especially on social media. I don't read it because I can't handle it. My brain wants to scream when I see her writing. Now, notice I didn't say when I read her writing, when I see her writing. No thanks. Don't want to look at that. 15 exclamation points when one does the job. One. We only need one. One. So, word art, be careful with it. Revise, revise, revise. I put revise 3 times. That is repetition. That is on purpose. You need to edit your work 3 times, at minimum 3 times. And in order to be a better writer, the only way to really do that effectively is to read more. And again, I don't want any of you panicking like, oh, I hate reading. Okay, no, you don't. You've got one of these. You've got one of these. Reading is how we communicate. Like right now, I have a message and I better answer this message, right? So I have to read it first. Do you still want help cooking today? Ha, check that out. Yes. Later. Right now, I'm filming a video lecture. All right, there. But guess what? I had to read her message before I could respond to it with writing. Reading and writing. We do it every day. Here's another message. Good morning. Happy Sunday. May it be a blessed one. And then another friend says, you as well. I'm headed to church. I'm going to say, I'm making a video lecture. All right. So reading and writing, you just need to be a little more intentional in what it is that you're reading and writing because you're on here every day. You're on here reading and writing something every day. Be a little more intentional in what you're reading. I'm not telling you to pick up novels and read them. I'm not telling you got to read Charles Dickens. I'm not doing that. You don't have to read Edgar Allan Poe. You definitely don't have to read Shakespeare. I would never ask you to read Shakespeare. I don't want to read Shakespeare. Can an English teacher say that? Oh, I guess I just did. But be more intentional in what you read. Find things that are interesting to you. Find short stories, find news articles, find different things that are of interest to you and read those. Right? The more you read, the more effective you will be at communicating. It's just a simple idea. And be very careful with punctuation. I think I proved that last week in the all those pictures of grammatical issues out there in the great big wide world of reality. Be very careful with punctuation because it can make or break your sentence. Now, some more things that you must know. Why you can be a writer. I came across an article written by this fella years ago, and I've been using it to teach this class material since that time. So this guy's name is Chuck Wendig, and he is, well, here it is, right? I flipped the screen and here we are. Why should you care what he has to say? Well, Chuck Wendig is a novelist, a screenwriter, and a game designer. This is his blog, Terrible Minds. He talks a lot about writing and food and the madness of toddlers. He uses lots of naughty language. Not safe for work, probably not safe for life. Be advised. So I thoroughly enjoy Chuck Wendig's articles. I enjoy his writing. I have several of his novels. He is a horror writer slash science fiction writer slash supernatural writer and a video game designer. So it's a pretty interesting fella. I like especially the way he words things because it's very blunt and direct and in your face. So I have taken, oh, those are the 3 novels of his that I have. Blackbirds, Mockingbird, and The Cormorant. And there's actually 2 more books in the series. What I will tell you about these books is that even after three, I couldn't tell you if I like Miriam Black or not, the main character. There's a part of me that loves her, that roots on for her, but then there's another part of me that just hates her. Like she's just a wretched person, but I want her to win. To elicit that kind of a response from me tells you he knows what he's doing with writing. So look at these pictures. They are made of so many other pictures. It's fascinating to me. I love this artwork. Love that artwork. Okay, moving on. So, disclaimer euphemisms throughout because Wendig has a dirty mouth. So, if you come across the word fish, that's in place of the F word. Right? I might say schnikes instead of the S word. So just know that moving in. Here is the beginning of this article. And by the way, this article is called 25 of My Personal Rules for Writing and Telling Stories. I, for some reason, have taken the title off, and I need to make sure I put that back. But I'm not going to read this. We need to just dive in, but that's the top of the article. You can pause this and read that for yourself if you want to, but let's go ahead. So, the very first thing that he says in this article is don't write what you know what you write. Saying write what you know limits us from the outset. We only know a limited number of things after all. I know the smell of honeysuckle on a summer's day. I know what it's like to have a toddler, to be a terrible bowler, to slurp up gin from my rat's nest of a beard so as not to waste its herbal booziness. We should certainly write to our experiences, but we cannot limit ourselves only to that. We should be encouraged then to have new experiences, to know and learn, gasp, new things. Write with authority and authenticity. Marry experience with imagination and a ceremony upon the story's page. So, what is he saying to us? How is this practical for nonfiction writing? He's saying to you, don't be afraid to learn new things. Get out there and have experiences. Be able to write about new things. Look at things from new perspectives, right? Take your time with things. Get to know more. Research. Experience life. And let that add to how you put a message together and how you understand an audience. The next item, bleed on the page. Don't write purely to escape pain and fear. Mine it. Extract those little nuggets of hard black hate coal and use them to fuel the writing of a scene, a chapter, maybe the whole gosh darn book. Cut yourself open. Color the words with your heart's blood. I'm an advocate of finding the things that you fear and opening old wounds to let them splash onto the characters and inform the tale at hand. We'll know, and we'll feel it too. This is where your experience matters. It's not necessarily in the nitty gritty of mechanical experience, but rather in the authenticity of your emotional life. And this is true for the opposite as well. Write about the things that thrill you, that stir hope, that deliver unto you paroxysms of tingly exultation. Be true to yourself and we'll all groke your lingo, daddy-o. So what he's saying here is you've got to be authentic in your writing. Use your own emotions, your own stresses, your own anxiety, your own fear, your own excitement to fuel your writing. Lay it on the page. Open yourself up. Be raw. See, one of the best ways to reach your audience is to be open and vulnerable in your writing. Cut yourself open. Let it out. Be vulnerable. Say things no one else is willing to say. Right? Beautiful. Let's see. Brands are for corn chips and car commercials. Trends are great for pop music and nightclubs, but you write the book you want to write. It's not like being a writer is a fast track to a dumpster full of cash. So why waste time writing stories that don't speak to you in some way? Besides, the books that you wrench free from your own heart and mind will be far greater and far more meaningful than anything delivered to you from the expectations of others. Find the story in you and find yourself in the story. Well, how does this relate to us? And I'm putting this in giant letters, right? Find a way to care about what it is that you have to write about. All through college, you're going to be given writing assignments, and you're not going to necessarily want to write each one of them. You're going to be like, oh, so boring. I hate this topic. It's your responsibility to find a way to care about it, because when you care about it, you access more words. That's just the truth. When you care about your subject, you access more words because that emotional background kicks in and we are able to write more, have more words, say more things when we care about it. So find a way to care about it. Doesn't matter which topic is, find a way to care about it. Do some reading online. Look up some crazy wild stories about whatever topic it is that you've been given. I mean, you could be reading a story, or you might have to write a piece about the different types of wood that people build furniture with. I don't know. I don't know. That could be a topic. Find some stories about different types of wood, like a type of wood that, um, uh, what's the bug that eats wood? Oh my God, this doesn't work if I can't remember the word. It's not a flea. What are the bugs that get into the wood and eat all the wood? Okay, anyway, moving on. You can tell a story about that. So don't use this kind of wood but those bugs don't like cedar. So using cedar in home projects is a great idea. Anyway, moving on. I'm a little embarrassed. Not really, but yeah. Anyway, show now, tell later. And I'll remind you of Stephen King with his, he loved to see her eyes light up with surprise and joy. He doesn't need to say the surprise and joy because eyes lighting up means that. So, show, don't tell. Show, now, tell later. Later. Show, don't tell is another one of those false dichotomy nuggets of advice. Anytime a piece of forbidding advice exists, you can nearly always produce a corollary example where X, Y, and Z stories utterly violate that precept with great heaping helpings of success. It seems to be fairly well regarded that a lot of the time it's best to default to show, but sometimes, hey, tell is good too. The only problem is when. Here's a good guideline: never tell in the beginning, always show first. You don't want to begin the story with an expositional lecture. You read the cereal box as you eat the cereal, not before. You got to get that first spoonful of honey boo boo bombs on your tongue before you're ready to settle in and read an ingredients list. Yeah? Order of operations is key. Dessert first, veggies later. Show now, put off telling as long as you can. So, what we're going to learn from this is our introduction has to be interesting to an essay. You got to reel, like I'm doing a fishing line here, like I'm holding my fishing pole, I'm going to go like this, and you got to reel your reader in. You have to share a story, give a summary of it, of another story, tell a story about the author's life, do something of interest to pull your reader in. Aim big, write small. Writers need goals, and I don't mean one goal. I mean nearly an endless and evolving series of goals. You don't just say, I'm going to write a novel, because duh, that's bare minimum stuff. You have to have a career planned out. This isn't a short game, it's a long con. College isn't a short game, it's a long con. Look as far down the line as you can, to retirement, to cremation, to the time when nanobots resurrect you to write one more best-selling hollow vid. That way you can always course correct to try to move yourself forward toward those goals. But, whereas your career is a long con, each story really is the short game. You want to keep your head in that story. You want to treat it like it's everything, like everything hangs on this one project, in part because it may. To put it differently, have the larger path plotted out, but focus on each step upon that path as if it's your last. So, how does this relate to us? Plot your path, one thing at a time. Always keep your goal in mind. Now, have goals, aim big, but focus on every task on the path as just as important as the next. That totally relates to your college experience. The goal is getting the degree, but every single assignment that you have on that pathway is just as important as the next. Let them build on each other. Absolutely. Don't blow a class off. It's just an important part. It is just as important as the next class. That transcript that you're building, that grade pathway that you're creating, very important for your future. So understand that. Aim big, write small. Audience is the monkey on the character's back. Audience is the monkey on your back too. Doesn't matter. Huh, put that away. It doesn't matter if we're writing fiction or nonfiction. See, here's the deal. We're all humans. Well, except you over there, you robot. No, no, don't talk to me. I shall not abide your bleeps and blorps and murderous metal intent. Humans tell stories, and when we do, we tell them about other humans. And here you say, wait, that's not right. We tell stories about unicorns and intelligent spaceships and mole men. And yes, technically, true. But those are always stand ins for people. We view all characters through the lens of our own humanity. It's the same reason trees only read magazines about trees printed on the flesh of humans. The circle of life. Character is how the audience gets through your story. Character is the vehicle. So what we're saying here is for us with nonfiction is you have to keep your audience in mind. You have to. They're sitting on your back. And your story, your essay has no point or purpose if it's not specifically geared to the audience that it's written for. It's just the truth. You have to keep that human element in mind. How do I reach my audience? Now, plot is Soylent Green. I said it before, but let me codify it now. Plot is not externally driven. I mean, it can be. Fine, yes. You can create a laundry list of external events that occur where characters are dropped into the proceedings like a pukey 4-year-old forced to ride a roller coaster. But that's not the strongest nor the most organic way to approach plot. Plot is Soylent Green. Plot is made of people. So some of you might get the reference, but that's from a movie back in the 70s where there was a food product created and being sold in stores that was made of people. Cannibalistic society kind of thing. So plot is made of people. Characters create, drive, and modify plot. They're not strapped into the ride. They're building the fishing roller coaster as it barrels forward. They change the story with every bad decision, every punch thrown, every intense desire and madcap fear. Too many storytellers force events. They shove the plot around like a schoolyard bully. Let the characters handle it. Let it be on them. The simplest plot is your characters do things and other characters respond. So, how does plot is Soylent Green help us as nonfiction writers? Well, in your nonfiction writing, you're going to be telling stories, you're going to be sharing examples, you're going to be giving instances of illustrations of reasons why. And when we tell those stories, we have to understand that the human element can't be left out. Stories are all about people. And so we need to tell them effectively. It's wonderful, wonderful. We need it for any main point that we're making, any major point we're making, you should tell a story. We, as humans, understand stories about other humans. And so we use examples. That's why preachers use stories. That's why politicians use stories. It's why lawyers tell stories. It's why salespeople always have a story just like yours. Stories. It's how we sell things. So we make ourselves like someone else because plot is Soylent Green. It's made of people. So conflict is the food that feeds the reader. Characters exist in a flat line until we challenge them. Sometimes they challenge themselves. Sometimes they're challenged by other people, by nature, by robots, or by fungal infections in and around one's nether country. Stories need conflict across the physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual spectra. Accidents, betrayals, cataclysm, desperation, excess. These are the letters in the alphabet of conflict. So how does this relate to us? What you write must be debatable. It must have opinionated. It must be opinionated. Must be opinion. Must be opinion. Must be opinionated. Must have opinion. The wording. Have conflict in your writing. It has to be strong, debatable. Somebody might read your piece and go, I don't think so. That means you've done a good job. If it is debatable, not everyone's going to agree with you ever on anything. And you can't ever force people to agree with you. You can only share your ideas. But share your ideas in a strong, balanced, thought out, evidence-based, researched manner and tell stories. Don't be afraid of conflict in your writing. How about this one? Fish trust. We think we want trustworthy storytellers. Trust is a positive trait, and why would we want anything different in a storyteller? The audience thinks it knows what it wants: happy endings, triumphant protagonists, defeated villains, a book that dispenses chicken McNuggets at the end of every chapter as a reward. But getting what we want, what we expect, is snooze-tacular. Trust in a storyteller is overrated. Safety is meaningless. The storyteller has to do what the storyteller has to do, which is hurt the character, and by proxy, the audience. The storyteller is like an evil dungeon master or a tricksy dominatrix. What the audience really wants is to acquiesce to the tale told. They want to be surprised by a particularly inventive dungeon trap or shocked when someone closes alligator clamps on your wriggly bits. We want to trust our storytellers only so far as to say, I trust that I cannot trust you. How does this relate to us? We need to think outside the box. And we need to be willing to say what others aren't willing to say. Be bold. Be strong in your writing. State your main point. Back it up. The dual function of story. I love this one. This one's fantastic. I mean, they're all fantastic. Good story serves two functions. One, it makes coffee. And two, it shoots lasers. Wait, that can't be right. Checks notes. Oh, see, sorry, wrong page. Those are the two things I want my cybernetic arm to do. Whatevs. Story. Yes, story. Good story does two things. One, it makes us feel. Two, it makes us think. It engages us emotionally and intellectually. Some authors misunderstand the story's purpose and spend too long mired in action and entertainment and forget that we could actually have to care about the characters, about the outcome, that it's essential that we come out of the book having both a visceral reaction and a reaction that makes us want to sit down with friends over pie and whiskey to talk about what we just read. Making someone think and feel is not entertaining in the strictest sense, but it's why stories matter. It's why our ideas matter. It's why our writing matters. So this relates to us in this way. Your task when you sit down to write an essay is to make the reader think and feel. If you cause the reader to think and feel, they're going to contemplate what you had to say. They're going to roll around your ideas. You might change their perspective. Now, the goal isn't to go out and change their perspective. The goal is to make them think and feel. I love that. Embrace the holy shnikes moment. Absolutely. I want to punch you in the stomach with my words. With my words, relax, put down the restraining order already. When you read my work, the ideal thing for me is to provide you with at least one moment where you gasp, where your eyes go wide and your jaw hangs loose like a broken porch swing, where you let out 3, maybe 4 drops of pee before the story caused you to lose your bearing for just that moment. It's key as a storyteller to try to orchestrate those moments where you violate expectation and drop a bunker buster on the characters. Be careful, though. The trick to the holy stuff moment is that it needs to feel organic, so that after the smoke is cleared and the trauma is worn thin, the events that transpired seem in retrospect like the only way it could have ever happened. How does this relate? Go for the gut punch. Be willing to say that shocking thing. Be willing to say your real honest opinion. That somebody out there is going to be like, go for it. In your writing, go for it. Here's how description works. A persistent question in terms of writing is, what and how much do I describe? Lovecraft describes every lamp and carpet fiber with intimate, bewildering detail, which he can get away with and you most likely cannot. Here's how you know what to describe. Ready? Is your mind quivering like the dumpy haunches of an overweight pony? Describe those things that break the status quo, that defy expectation. Listen to this. Really listen to this. We know what a chair looks like, so you don't need to describe it unless it's got a broken leg, or is of some unusual art period, or has blood on it, or is made of mouse bones and rat whiskers, or it sings show tunes. The things that need description are the things that, to risk redundancy, the audience needs described. If they cannot escape this chapter without knowing how this thing smells, then you better talk that stench up post haste. Ah, I love this. If it needs described, describe it. Does your audience need to see it, hear it, feel it, touch it, taste it? Then describe it. Describe what needs description. Boom. Pretty simple. We'll come back to that a little bit later. The rule of threes. When in doubt, the rule of threes, go back, is a rule that plays well with all of storytelling. When describing a thing, no more than 3 details. A character's arc, 3 beats. A story, 3 acts. An act, 3 sequences. A plot point culminating in a mystery of a twist, at least 3 mentions throughout the tale. This is an old rule and a good one. It's not universal, but it is a good place to start. This is why when we're putting an outline together, normally we have 3 main points and 3 subpoints for every main point. It's the rule of threes. Now, on a couple of our essays, we're going to have 4 main points, but that's because I have particular goals in mind for those essays. But in most of writing, especially when you're doing description, it's 3 bits of description. Because what happens when you only give 3 bits of description is you're letting your reader fill in the rest of the information with their own imagination. And you want to invite your reader to use their imagination. That's important. Now, every story is an argument. Let's go with that. Put me over here for a second. Every story is you saying something. That's theme. Maybe it's the theme that the audience discovers. Maybe it isn't. But just the same, every story is you making a case for something. It's a thesis that you're trying to prove. You're trying to say that love is everything, or love is hopeless, or that nature will defeat man, or man will defeat himself, or bees will defeat bears, or robots are fishing awesome. I don't know, man, I'm not you. Have a point of view. Have a perspective. Let your fiction state a case and argue that stuff till it's blue in the face. It's not about being right or being wrong. It's about saying something. Argument is everywhere. Embrace it. Everything you're going to write is an argument in some sense. Every message that you give, every post that you make on social media, every discussion that you have with people, everything is an argument. Can you put it together well? You need to look at it from that perspective, that it is an argument. Now, stories are like people. They need oxygen. All aspects of a story need time to breathe. Your story isn't one of those amusement park rides that shoots you up 100 feet in the air. A story isn't a race to the end. Plus, that kind of thing will surely cause you to void your bowels upon whatever meth-scarred carny is operating the so-called amusement ride, a ride that hasn't been in service since 1972 and still has the blood of the teenage girl who died on it greasing all of its diabolical gears. Thanks, Chuck. Let the tale have peaks and valleys, peaks of action and tension and violence, then valleys of reflection, emotion, fear, and desire. The oxygen is thin at the peaks, thick in the valleys. The peaks get taller as the story goes, and the valleys grow deeper. To go back to the show versus tell thing, it's better to show at the peaks and tell only in the valleys. How does this affect us? Well, your stories need white space. They need oxygen. Your reader needs to be able to breathe. Have pauses. Let people breathe. Use effective punctuation. Let the reader breathe. Very important that your piece has oxygen. Now, here is a beautiful, beautiful idea. Stop. I'm having like an allergy thing today. When I sat down to first make this video, my eyes were watering, and then my nose was running, and then the nose just gets itchy, right? And now I'm coughing. What's going on? Anyway, care less. Care less. This is a recent revelation for me, but one I'm keeping close for the near future. Sure, it seems an odd thing to suggest that we should care less than we already do. It seems dismissive, disrespectful even. But authors care too much, in my experience. We care well beyond the gates of rationality. We let the perfect sit in its impossible to reach treehouse, pelting us with sticks and stones and pieces of old G.I. Joe figures, when really we should be happy aiming firmly for the good. Caring less frees you. It frees you to write a bad draft and fix it later. It frees you from feeling stung by every not 5-star review. It frees you from the fear of the editor's slashing pen or your professor's slashing pen. It frees you from the paralysis of rejection. Care less. Note that the lesson here isn't don't care. You should care, but you should also calm the fish down a little, is all I'm saying. You guys, perfect doesn't exist. So those of you who claim to be perfectionists when you're writing, you're stressing yourself out. You are causing yourself unwarranted anxiety. You need to calm down. Care less. Go for your best. Go for good. And we do that by writing a bad, rough draft and fixing it later. And we'll talk about that next week. Very important information, but I have to get this across to you. You need to care less. Now, that doesn't mean don't care, but calm down a little bit. The perfect does not exist. So stop stressing yourself out. Stop trying for perfect. Go for your best. And Chuck actually says go for the good. Realize your reach. Getting close to the end of this one. You can only control so much. You can't control agents or publishers or the audience unless you're some kind of Pied Piper Svengali, which actually explains how some tremendously poopy books get such rabid fan throttling. You can control your story. You control characters, plot, the words on the page, rhythm, pacing. You control the quality of the work. So, control that. Write the best book you can possibly write. Everything else is a leaf on the river. You can maybe puff out your cheeks and blow it, this way or that, but so much is left to the vagaries of fate. Control what you can control and abide the rest. So, how does that relate to us? Control what you can. Organize your work. Next week, I think it's next week, we're going to go over, let me look at, yes, it is next week. We're going to go over the writing process and outlining. How do we effectively outline? Well, that's what this is all about. Control what you can, and you can control the structure of your argument. You can control your word choices. You can control defining unfamiliar terms. You can control telling stories. You can control many aspects of your message. And so that's what we want to work on. But also realize your reach. You can only control so much. You can't control how people are going to react to your message. You can't control whether they're going to have a change of heart and change their perspective. That's outside your reach. That's not your business. I have one of my daughters always says, mind your business. Like if you ask her a question about something, she'll be like, mind your business. Okay. It's not wrong. Mind your business. Now, this one, this is one of those moments. Harden the fish up, Care Bear. The writer's back is studded with arrows, blow darts, quills, 1-star reviews, red pens, rejection letters rolled up into tight little tubes and shellacked with editor spit so as to form the equivalent of prison shivs. It's hard out there for wandering pen monkey. We don't have the equivalent of a hobo code with chalk marks on the sidewalk indicating dangerous vanity press lives here, or deluded self-publisher blog high on his own ego incoming, or that away lurks a mean old editor face. So, cultivate calluses. Secrete enzymes to build your own authorial exoskeleton. Learn to take a punch. No glass jaws in writing, pal. What does this mean? This means harden the fish up, Care Bear. You need critique. We all need critique. I need critique. Every one of us needs critique because none of us is perfect. Your message can always get better. And oftentimes it's going to be the eyes of another person who look at your message and give suggestions. You're not going to see everything that's wrong with what your message is. You're just not. We're too close to it. We're too emotionally attached to it. So we have to have critique, and we are going to practice peer review in this class. Very important that you get okay with having someone else give you insight, critique, review on your work. You need it. So harden up. Don't be so easily hurt by things. Don't take everything so personally. Most often, people are just trying to help us be better. Rejection, failure, all of these things, they're good for us. Notice I'm not just saying you, I'm including myself there. It's good for us to have to learn new things and to have to suck it up and not run and cry when someone hurts our feelings. Look at the bigger picture. Look at the whole situation and ask, what's the lesson here? How do I get better? How does my message get better? Not perfect, because perfect isn't possible. But how do I get better? Well, we have to have critique in order to do that. Ah, it's good stuff. Good stuff. And completo el pupo. Finishing a story will separate you from most of the other writers out there. Writers out there in authorland. Finish your work, Space Case. Here, let me put it to you this way. Finishing your worst piece of stuff story you've ever written will feel 1,000 times better than not finishing the most brilliant tale you've ever spun. Achieve narrative euphoria. So basically the idea here is, right, finish what you start. Finish what you start. You start a project, finish it. Follow it through. All right. Oh, I thought we were getting close to done with this, but we're not. Read your work out loud. Very important. Don't give me that look. Read your work out loud. Don't argue, don't fight. It will help, I promise. I promise, I guarantee it. If you find it didn't help you, let me know. I will let you taser me in the face. And by me, I mean some other guy who will be my stand-in. Probably some real estate agent or toll booth attendant. Read your work out loud. A best-selling novelist said it. Every Comp One book says it. Every author who has put together writing advice says it. Read your work out loud. Your ears will hear mistakes that your eyes can't see. That's a fact. Your ears will hear things your eyes don't see. Just like when I was going through the syllabus with you, I came across a couple of mistakes that I needed to correct, so I corrected them right there. I've uploaded that syllabus, the one that I made the couple of corrections in, onto Blackboard for you. I had to read it out loud in order to hear the mistakes that my eyes weren't catching. Same goes for you. Don't worry about what anybody thinks. Don't worry about, oh, somebody's watching me. Oh, who cares? Let that go. Harden the fish up, Care Bear. Right? Care less. Read your work out loud. It will help. Understand that haters are going to hate. You can't do anything about this. Fish them. They're part of the ecosystem. Drink the hate like it's Kahlua and cream. Inspiring love and hate is better than inspiring a middle of the road mushy moderate shrug. I'd rather have, and notice this is in all caps, your story made me main the mailman just for delivering it to me, than a quavering, haters gonna hate. You can't please everybody. Embrace it. It's okay. You do you. Share your message. Be as effective as you can to reach your audience just so that they think and feel. Right? And right like the end of is nigh. So this one last one on this, and then we've got a couple other things to talk about. The best advice I can give right now is write like you have no time left. Write like you've got a slow-mo bullet tumbling towards your head and you can't get out of the way. Write like the end times are here. Like the Mayans were right, and in a few short months, we're all going to die in a tidal wave or an earthquake or a pyroclastic stuff fit or a bird attack. Think about that. Let's say you had 2 years left on your clock. What book would you write? What story inside you struggles to get to the front of the line, screaming and yelping and waving its arms like a drowning man? Write that story. It doesn't have to be the only thing you write. You can take paycheck jobs, but make time for that kind of writing. Writing isn't just about giving the audience something. It isn't just entertainment. It's about giving to yourself too. Because bad news, maybe you have 2 years left. Maybe you have 20 or 40 or 60. But we're all going to end up under the Grim Reaper's writing mower. So get busy writing what you want to write, or get busy sucking exhaust. Do your best today. Do your best on the project that's in front of you. Write that project like it's the best one ever. Focus. I love this idea, right? And I do think about that. I mean, this is advice that I think about. I've got a book project right now that I think I'm about ready to begin. And yeah, right, like the end is nigh. It's not about who might not like it. It's about what I need to say. So yeah, do your best today. And if you need to say it, say it. So there's a recap of everything that we just went through. And I'm not going to read all those titles again, but that's what that article was about. And again, it's called 25 of My Personal Rules for Writing and Telling Stories by Chuck Wendig. So excellent article. I have a copy of it if you ever want that. I can add it to handouts. I don't have it in there currently, but it can be added. Now, my favorite handout of all that I have given to you is this one: How to Increase Your Word Count. This has the potential to change everything for you when it comes to writing, because I know the majority of you struggle with reaching the word count. If I give you 1,000-word essay, you're like, I can only get to 750. I can only get to 600. Is that right? You didn't read the handout then, did you? So what I'm going to share with you right now, great information. So how to increase your word count. The very first one is be descriptive. Utilize the rule of threes, which we just read from Chuck Wendig, right? For any item that needs describing, if your reader must know how that chair looks or how this thing smells or what that bird sounds like, then describe it. Use the five senses to create description, but give the items being described no more than 3 bits of description each. But think about, what does it smell like? What does it feel like? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? Describe it. Imagine your reader as ignorant of what you know. Most often, the reader is, in fact, ignorant of what you know. I can't, I can tell you that I'm using a mouse to change the slides as we're doing this PowerPoint presentation. So in your head, all of you are picturing the mouse that you use with your computer. But mine probably doesn't look like yours. Mine is red and has a construction vehicle sticker on it that my grandson put there, and I don't have the heart to take off. My mouse doesn't look like yours. And if this was an important thing that I needed to describe, I would tell you that it's red on top, has a construction vehicle sticker on the bottom of it that my grandson put there for me. Describe what needs described. You could take a whole paragraph to describe a thing. Look at that. You've already added 250, 300 words, maybe 100, whatever. Description adds words. Never assume they know what you're seeing in your own mind. Use specifics. Put yourself there. See it, hear it, touch it, taste it, smell it. I could tell you that, I mean, you've already seen it, but I could tell you that, oh, here, I'll use something else on my desk. I got my kids all the same Christmas gift. Here's my description. I got my kids all the same Christmas gift, and it's a very unusual Christmas gift. It makes this noise. Oh, well, what is that? Could you possibly, I mean, anybody possibly have any clue what kind of a item might make that kind of a noise? Ooh, right? You don't know. But I could describe. It sounds like a metal, scraping metal, right? The top of it is red, the bottom of it is silver. It's the best Christmas gift ever, thoroughly, right? I absolutely love this gift. It's a cigarette lighter, red on top, silver on the bottom. But what makes it even more cool is most of us don't smoke, right? And a lot of cars may not even have cigarette lighter holes in them anymore. But this is one for a car. But what makes it so freaking cool is that it says eject on it. See that? So we have eject and we have, turn it over, fire missile. I couldn't just tell you that I got people cigarette lighters for Christmas and you have any kind of an understanding what I was talking about, I'm going to have to use words to describe those. Add words to your writing. It adds to your word count, and that's a win. So the next item here on the handout is include examples, stories, and statistics. To strengthen an idea, include stories, pathos, and statistics, logos. Be thorough in telling stories, leave nothing out. For any of your main points, tell a story. You're adding words, but you're also adding strength to your point, just like a good politician does, just like a good preacher does, just like a good salesman, a lawyer, a professor. When we make points, we tell stories. Because humans understand stories about other humans, we learn from the experiences of others. We have things that happen to us that we learned a lesson from, and then we tell that story to others. That's called giving a testimony. Tell stories in your writing. Doesn't matter what you're writing about. Give examples. Doesn't necessarily have to be a story. It can be statistical data. You could add quotes. You could add paraphrases. You could add lots of things under this example category. And this adds words after words after words to your writing. You can come close to doubling the length of your piece just by adding some stories and statistics. So there you go. You're welcome. Now, the next one, mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. And I am requiring on your essays, I'm requiring when you use a quote or a paraphrase, I'm requiring you to have a signal phrase. If you do not use signal phrases, you will lose points. I'm saying it. I hope you're watching this because I hope you hear me say that. Those of you that don't watch the video lectures and don't read the PowerPoints or the handouts, you're going to be getting points taken. And I'm going to kind of smirk because I told you this in several places. So if you're just trying to skim through, cut corners, don't take it seriously, you're going to be getting points taken off on your papers. But for those of you who are paying attention, who want to do your very best, we are going to have required signal phrases for all quotes and paraphrases in our essays. Now, let's read all this information here. It says random quotes carry little to no weight in strengthening your argument. If you explain who said what's coming and why their word is important, all of a sudden the quote carries weight to your argument. Here's an example. Stephen King, author of many short stories, including The Man Who Loved Flowers, gave an example of repetition in that particular short story that is bone-chilling. He wrote, and he swung the hammer, swung the hammer, swung the hammer, as he had done 5 other times. So I set it up. I set up the quote, right? So I could have just said, Stephen King wrote, and he swung the hammer, swung the hammer, swung the hammer, as he had done 5 other times. Okay, that's great, whatever. But it's better to say, author of many short stories, including The Man Who Loved Flowers, gave an example of repetition in that particular short story that is bone-chilling. There's my word choice that could perhaps be debatable. I had a bone-chilling. But it sets the quote up. It lets the reader know why this is important. We always need to let the reader know why you're quoting something. Why is it important? Why is this here? So a great example that I took from a Comp 2 paper from last year is this. The Writing Center at the St. Louis Community College, a reputable academic establishment serving over 30,000 students a year, defines logos as an appeal to the audience's sense of reason or logic. To use logos, the author makes clear logical connections between ideas and includes the use of facts and statistics. And then we have our parenthetical citation. Do you see how wonderful that is? That is a great setup. To just say the Writing Center at St. Louis Community College defines logos as, and then gives it, doesn't really tell your reader much. You haven't told them why that quote coming from St. Louis Community College is reliable. And so to add that additional data, a reputable academic establishment serving over 30,000 students a year. This is not a small rinky-dink school. This is a large community college system. And their writing center defines logos this way. Now it means more to your reader. You have to use words in your signal phrases. Add words, add a whole paragraph of signal phrase prior to a quote or a paraphrase. Let your reader know why this information is important to share. Why are you quoting it? Why are you paraphrasing it? Tell the reader. You also need to use them to mark boundaries. And this is when we're taking a look at paraphrases. When you're writing along, or this happens a lot when I'm grading papers, like I'll just be reading along and all of a sudden I come to a parenthetical citation. Well, what is the paraphrase? I don't know where it started because you didn't tell me. You didn't mark a boundary. You didn't use a signal phrase. I have no idea what is the information that requires a parenthetical citation. No clue. So you have to set that. You have to put the signal phrase in prior to a paraphrase. Mark a boundary. Signal phrases mark boundaries between your words and the source's words. By marking the boundary, you also provide a smooth transition for the reader between your words and the source. Very important component of getting an effective message across. To emphasize the source, this is another reason, call attention to the author or source being used. In most cases, such as a literature review or the use of a well-known author, specific information about the source is important for the reader to know. Give adequate and specific details regarding the source. Add to its ethos, its credibility. We also use a signal phrase to help us avoid plagiarism. All source material must be cited, and signal phrases are one way to cite a source. However, additional citation formatting may be necessary depending on your citation style, and this is important for you because we are using MLA. In MLA format, signal phrases are used with in-text citations. Both are necessary for proper source citation. So we need both. Now here, this is an incredible way to increase your word count. Include opposing perspectives in your argument. To create an effective argument essay, including opposing perspectives can double the word count. This is a simple concept. So we've already added a lot of words by using examples, right? By using signal phrases. But now we can't let go of this idea here. Use opposing ideas, opposing perspectives in your writing. It strengthens your argument. It builds credibility, ethos, when you, the writer, are willing to admit that there are other perspectives than just your own. Be fair if you want to be heard. Think about that. When someone comes at you and they basically have a finger pointed at you and they're like, you have to believe this because blah, 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 blah. And all they share is their own perspective. You're going, whoa, hold on there. When you read a thing and it's just one-sided, well, I don't know about you, but that kind of makes my skin crawl. I want to see that you understand that yours is not the only perspective, that there are, to most subjects, multiple perspectives. Share that in your writing. And another thing that you can do with that is not only share those perspectives, but combat them. Here's why I disagree. Here's why I believe that that is not correct. You combat it. So let me get back to reading here. State what the opposing perspective is, are, and argue it in the paper, combating it with your own research and opinion. Show that you understand the opposing perspective by the seriousness with which you treat the addition of that information in your essay. Let your own argument meet the opposing perspective at every point. This is exciting, and it makes you credible. Ethos, 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 ethos. Ooh, say that a whole lot. It's a tongue twister. You have to have. You should have, if you want to have an effective argument, include opposing perspectives, and then combat those with your own research. This doubles your word count. So if you're sitting at 600 words and you need to have 1,000, y'all, really, if you just do the things that I've said to this point, not a hard task. Not a hard task to get there. It's really not. You just have to think about these things. Define unfamiliar terms. Here's another idea. Often in our writing, we have information the audience does not have. We understand concepts or tools, rules, or words which our audience is ignorant. Ignorance is not a negative word, it simply means without information. When this is the case, and it will require you to look at your topic and your work from the audience's perspective and add definitions to your writing, just like I did here in this paragraph with the word ignorance. In this case, it's okay to assume the need for definitions. See, I did it right here. I added words right here. We understand concepts or tools, rules, and words of which our audience is ignorant. Ignorance is not a negative word. It simply means without information. Boom. I added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 words of definition. Do that. It's not a huge way to add words, but it does add words, and it strengthens the argument. It's better to err on the side of clarity than to lose an audience for lack of clarity. Defining words and concepts adds to your word count. Now, pronouns. Let's talk about pronouns. There are instances where pronoun usage confuses a reader. For instance, if I said, Paul and John went to the grocery store, he bought a soda. The obvious question here is, who bought the soda? Because it's not clear. You may think this does not occur in your writing, but chances are, and I say this with kindness, it does occur in your writing. To correct the situation, some rewording of the sentences is necessary. For instance, Paul and John went to the store, he bought a soda, is better written as, when Paul and John went to the store, Paul bought a soda. Now, this didn't add a difference-making number of words to the basic tenets of this small story, but the concept of clarity with pronouns is here. So, when you are reading, especially when you read your work out loud, pronoun issues should jump out at you. They might not, but let someone else read your work and they're going to be noticing those. They're going to be like, who? What? I don't understand what this means. And so you can go in, rearrange the words or add some words to make it more clear. Now, taking this a little further, here's another fantastic example of an unclear pronoun usage. To keep birds from eating seeds, soak them in blue food coloring. Soak who? The birds or the seeds? To better state this, say, to keep birds from eating seeds, soak the seeds in blue food coloring. Be clear, this is not bad repetition, it is clarity. Again, this does not add a life-altering number of words. However, demonstrative pronouns are exceptionally capable of confusing readers. What are demonstrative pronouns? These are pronouns that specify a particular person or thing. They include such, that, these, this, and those. At times, our usage of these pronouns leaves the reader with questions and confusion. For example, we can either choose to be clear or unclear with our pronoun usage. This is important to discuss. While this statement might not be completely vague in its meaning, a reader might wonder which part of choose to be clear or unclear that this refers to. To go for clarity, the statement could read, we can either choose to be clear or unclear with our pronoun usage. Using clear pronouns is important to discuss. Often I find replacing the demonstrative pronoun with the actual words it represents provides strong clarity and increases your word count. So when you go back through your writing, look for these words. Look for that, these, this, those, such. Look for those words and ask yourself, do I need to put what they reference here instead in order for this to be clear? Now, in the realm of pronoun usage too, we must consider that in today's world, some people choose their own pronouns at times. And when writing these into stories and essays, you need to be clear. If a character is going to choose they, them pronouns, but soon a second character is introduced, and the pair of characters, the one known as he and the one known as they, are then referred to as they, them together, this can lose a reader. It is best to be clear up front by stating that the character chooses they, them pronouns and then work to only use those pronouns in reference to that particular character and use fully fleshed out words, names, descriptions, more words to clarify when speaking of more than one character. Hope this explanation makes sense, because in order to build strong arguments, we must be clear to our readers. And again, this comes down to a situation where some of you are going to be like, well, I understand it. Okay, great that you understand it, but if the audience is confused, then there's no point in your writing. If the audience doesn't get the message, there's no point. So you have to consider your audience. You have to be keeping them in mind. You've got to be as clear as you can be. Something to keep in mind is this: it does not matter how clear you think you are if the reader or the listener, the spouse, the friend, the boss, the coworker, etc., does not understand your meaning. Just doesn't even matter. Doesn't matter how clear you think you are if they're not getting it. So keep that in mind. Clarity is key. All of these, how to increase your word count points, are vital, not only to increasing your word count, but also to strengthening your argument. Very important for you to understand. So there is that recap. We want to be descriptive, include examples, use a signal phrase for all quotes and paraphrases, include opposing perspectives, define unfamiliar terms, and be wary or leery of pronoun usage. All of these are ways to increase your word count. They're all a giant win. You can get there. Absolutely can get there. So I'm going to take a moment here. Be right back. All right. I just took a look at the remainder of the PowerPoint, and there's still a lot left. But I also know that I've been talking for a long time, and so the lecture's getting pretty extensive. Every bit of this is important. The whole point in this lecture is to give you tips, to give you tricks, to help build your confidence so that you know that you can do this. We made it to about slide 51 in the PowerPoint, but you have the PowerPoint for yourself. So those of you who are very interested in knowing more about description and using examples, I highly suggest that you open that PowerPoint up and you read your way through the rest of it. The rest of that information, it all comes from books, textbooks. Some of it comes from On Writing by Stephen King, which, let me show that to you, is right here. Some of the information that comes in the remainder of the PowerPoint is from this book as well. Take some time, go through it. I'm not going to take up any more of your time with the video lecture. I'm just feeling it. I'm just feeling, okay, let's end on a high note. That How to Increase Your Word Count handout, mind-blowing. So take some time. If you want to, I suggest that you do read through the remainder of the PowerPoint. There is important information there. But for any other purpose, I'm going to go ahead and close the video lecture out. And I will say to you, I'll see you next week, and we will discuss the writing process and outlining. I'm excited about that. I'm also going to tell you that this week's lecture, the longest one of the semester. So I'll let you go. It was going to be longer, but I'm going to let you go. So do that reading on your own, and I'll talk at you next week. Bye.